Hey everyone, grab a pillow and let's wander into Mount Olympus for a bit. These Greek gods were incredibly powerful and immortal, but they could also be comically petty and foolish. Imagine divine beings having temper tantrums or making absurd choices just because they felt like it. We'll take a leisurely, storybook-like stroll through some of the dumbest and most ridiculous things the Olympian gods ever did. It's all told in a calm, conversational way, kind of like me sitting here, drinking chamomile tea and telling you stories as you drift off. We'll be talking about gods cheating, getting jealous over silly stuff, unleashing monsters for no good reason, and even the invention of stupidity as a concept. And yes, we have sources for these strange tales, just in case anyone needs a history lesson. Let's start with Zeus, the big boss of the gods. Zeus was no stranger to temptation, but cheating on his wife Hera was definitely one of his worst mistakes. In fact, Zeus's pattern of infidelity was so extreme that it triggered a full-on revolt led by none other than his own wife Hera, along with their children Apollo and Artemis, and even his brother Poseidon. Can you imagine? Olympus was the scene of a divine rebellion. Hera, Apollo, Artemis, and Poseidon actually bound Zeus in unbreakable chains for a while, trying to overthrow his rule. It was like a cosmic coup d'etat. The gods hoped for some kind of council to replace Zeus's one-man show, but that didn't last long. The rebellion failed, the conspirators were brutally punished, and somehow the smith god Hephaestus ended up crippled with every bone broken. In simpler terms, Zeus learned the hard way that cheating on the goddess of marriage wasn't a smart move. The takeaway? Don't cheat on Hera. Seriously. When we think of Zeus's dumb moves, we also have to look at what happened before he was the top god. Zeus's dad, Kronos, the leader of the Titans, had been so paranoid about a prophecy that one of his kids would overthrow him, that he literally ate his children as soon as they were born. That's right. Kronos swallowed Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, Hera, and Hades one by one. Only young Zeus escaped because his mother, Rhea, tricked Kronos by giving him a rock wrapped in baby clothes instead. Zeus grew up, and with some clever help, forced Kronos to disgorge all those siblings he had eaten. It's hard not to call that a pretty bonkers move on Kronos' part. Imagine swallowing your kids just to avoid getting dethroned, only to eventually have to cough them back up anyway. Lesson learned by the gods. Paranoia can lead to some seriously stupid decisions. Zeus had other gimmicks too. For example, to punish humanity, he famously created Pandora, the first woman, and gave her a container of gifts. And guess what? It wasn't even a box. It was a jar. Zeus gave Pandora this jar of evils as a kind of twisted wedding gift, knowing she would open it. When Pandora inevitably uncorked the jar, all the evils of the world, sickness, pain, tragedy, flew out to plague mankind. Terrible move, Zeus. At least he left one thing inside, hope. That moment explains why people still say Pandora's box, but a proper ancient source confirms it was really a jar of misfortune. Beyond domestic drama and jar tricks, Zeus was also involved in one of mythology's biggest follies, the Trojan War. It all started with a really dumb decision involving beauty pageant bribes. Zeus had his future son Paris judge a contest between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Aphrodite promised Paris the most beautiful mortal woman, Helen of Sparta, if he picked her as the winner. Sure enough, Paris chose Aphrodite, and Aphrodite rewarded him with Helen. Poor Helen ran off to Troy with Paris, and just like that, the Greeks launched a massive war to get her back. That was arguably Aphrodite's dumbest trick and one of the biggest blunders of Olympus, sparking a 10-year war over pretty hair. So even though it was Aphrodite's doing, Zeus's whole situation escalated because of a cute bribe about Helen. In summary, Zeus's reign on Olympus had more than its share of catastrophes. He was taken down by his own wife and children. He forced his father to vomit up family members. He tricked Pandora into releasing evils, and he indirectly started the Trojan War through a beauty contest bribery. Not his finest moments, that's for sure. The gods might be immortal, but they made some really mortal mistakes. Now let's chat about Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, and apparently of personal grudges. Athena was proud of her weaving skills, so when a mortal woman named Arachne claimed she could weave better than the goddess herself, Athena took offense. The two held an epic weaving contest that apparently ended in a tie. How humble. But Athena couldn't handle being shown up. She tore Arachne's beautiful tapestry to shreds and then cursed her into a spider. So instead of weaving in peace, Arachne was stuck spinning webs for eternity. Talk about holding a grudge. Athena created Arachne's greatest nemesis in that moment, dooming generations of Arachne's family to suffer her spidery curse. All because Athena couldn't just congratulate a talented mortal. Not a cool move for the wise goddess. And it is kind of ironic that Athena, goddess of wisdom, acted so petty. Instead of showing a little grace, she reacted with full-on fury. The moral of the story? Don't brag about beating a goddess at her own game, because Athena might unleash the pettiness of the ages on you. On to Poseidon, god of the sea, and also of earthquakes and horses. Poseidon once got in a petty contest with Athena over who would be the patron of the city of Athens. Each god offered a gift to win the people's favor. Athena's gift was an olive tree. Poseidon's gift? A saltwater spring. Literally just a weird spout of seawater. Not only was that a worthless gift, it was actually useless for daily life. The legend says the Athenians smartly picked Athena's olive tree, leaving Poseidon all salty and embarrassed. Literally, his gift was worthless salt water. So yes, one of Poseidon's dumb moments was thinking a random well of seawater would impress anyone. Poseidon wasn't done with silliness. In another story, he supposedly tried to punish people with earthquakes at the drop of a hat. Remember Atlantis or any big earthquake story? Poseidon gets that blame for showing off, but often there's no good reason, just flashy anger. He even blundered by supporting losers in the Trojan War, causing some confusion. But the saltwater contest is the funniest. Imagine bragging, "Look, I brought you water to drink, and it's just undrinkable ocean water." Awkward. Artemis, the huntress goddess, is another one with a streak of irrational anger. In the famous Niobe myth, a mortal woman boasted about having more children than Leto, Artemis's mother. Niobe bragged, "I've got 7 daughters and 7 sons. Way more than Leto's too." Ouch. Not surprisingly, Artemis and Apollo were incensed by this pride. In a brutal twist, Apollo and Artemis promptly slayed all 14 of Niobe's children as punishment for her boastfulness. Yep, every single one. A terribly extreme response for a little bragging. Artemis later turned Niobe herself into a weeping stone statue. This was a ridiculously over-the-top reaction by Artemis, showing just how vindictive these gods could be. Another tale. Actaeon, a young hunter, accidentally stumbled upon Artemis while she was bathing naked. Oops, Artemis was having none of it, even though Actaeon didn't mean any disrespect. One version says he even boasted of hunting skills, but most say he just got a shock. She transformed Actaeon into a deer and set his own hunting dogs on him. The dogs chased and tore him apart, not realizing it was their master. So Artemis turned a guy into dinner, literally. Again, pretty savage punishment for an accident. It's yet another example of Artemis's notorious short fuse. And it doesn't end there. Artemis once played a role in unleashing the Caledonian boar. When King Ennius of Caledon forgot to honor her at a festival, Artemis got angry and sent a gigantic wild boar to ravage his kingdom. This was basically a divine tattletale trap of Godzilla proportions for the king. The boar caused so much chaos that heroes had to unite to slay it. Once again, Artemis resorted to monstrous overkill to send a message about respect. All told, Artemis has a running resume of explosive overreactions. Killing all of Niobe's children, ripping Actaeon apart for an accidental peek, and terrorizing harvests with giant animals. It's like she decided vengeance should always be complete and dramatic. Maybe we can forgive Artemis a bit. After all, she's protecting her own privacy and proud family name. But wow, she definitely did some dumb and deadly stuff by mortal standards. Ares, the god of war, somehow isn't very good at war schemes. In one myth told by Rick Riordan's fan site, Ares actually tried to trick the big 3, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, into a war by stealing their most treasured fashion accessories. Seriously, Ares' battle plan was basically, let's start WWII over literally stolen belts, cups, and stuff. Predictably, it blew up in his face. His plans were foiled by a random kid of Poseidon and that kid's friends, making Ares look foolish. He thought he could pit the gods against each other, but even they apparently have alliances stronger than a wardrobe dispute. The Ares debacle could have been avoided with even a sliver of common sense. A tongue-in-cheek source points out that Ares could have started a big fight just by spreading a rumor, for example, saying Hades hates Poseidon's new haircut, or Poseidon thinks Zeus chews like a hippo, instead of stealing stuff. No need for Titan or god involvement, just a little gossip. In fact, the write-up jokingly notes that Ares' girlfriend, Aphrodite, has been far more effective at instigating wars, hello, Trojan War, than the god of war himself. Bottom line, Ares tried some ridiculously complicated scheme to start a war when a mean tweet would have sufficed. Definitely not his brightest moment. Speaking of Aphrodite, the goddess of love clearly added to the chaos. Aphrodite's biggest blunder was getting Paris of Troy tangled up with Helen of Sparta. When Zeus casually asked Paris to judge the fairest goddess, Aphrodite bribed him by offering the love of Helen, the world's most beautiful mortal. Paris took the deal. Aphrodite helped Paris whisk Helen back to Troy, triggering the Trojan War. It all stemmed from a selfish promise. In other words, Aphrodite effectively started a massive war over vanity. And yes, that turned out to be one of the most catastrophic mistakes in all mythology. Tens of thousands of Greeks and Trojans died while gods just rolled their eyes or picked sides. Blunder number 1, bribing Paris with romance. Blunder number 2, not thinking through that 5-on-1 sort of thing. Ultimately, the events around Helen were like shooting arrows into a beehive. Aphrodite definitely poked the hornet's nest. Aphrodite's antics didn't stop there. She also interfered in mortal love lives in selfish ways. For example, she made sure that mortal Daphne never found a suitor or cursed others over jealousy. But the Troy fiasco is the crown jewel of her mistakes. Starting a decade-long war because of a beauty pageant gone wrong is about as epic and dumb as it gets. Apollo, god of the sun and prophecy, had his own strange twists. One of the weirdest stories is about his mortal prophet, Cassandra. Apollo fell in love with Cassandra and granted her the gift of prophecy so she would be his. When Cassandra didn't reciprocate his feelings, Apollo cursed her instead. She would always tell the truth, but no one would ever believe her. Talk about a cruel joke. Now imagine having perfect knowledge of the future and never getting credit. Cassandra warned everyone about the Trojan horse, the fall of Troy, and her own doom, but nobody listened. It's one of the most tragic pranks a god ever played. Apollo basically gave her a useless superpower and then laughed as she suffered disbelief. Apollo also got caught up in minor snafus. He was tricked by mortals sometimes, or he accidentally fathered children whose fates he messed up, like he killed his son Asclepius for raising the dead. He got into petty fights with mortals too, firing arrows at women who scorned him, or cursing King Midas with donkey ears for criticizing his music. But by far, Apollo's creepiest practical joke was on Cassandra, essentially making her the ultimate unheeded whistleblower. It remains a legendary god move gone horribly wrong. Hephaestus, the smith god, might not have the temper of Athena or Artemis, but he still played tricks. After being treated terribly by his mother Hera, she tossed him out of Olympus for being lame. Hephaestus got revenge in a pretty clever way. He forged a beautiful golden throne just for Hera. The moment she sat on it, invisible chains locked her in place. Imagine sitting down for a quick rest and getting stuck in your own chair. The other gods panicked, but Hephaestus refused to free Hera unless Zeus promised to give him whatever he wanted. Hephaestus wanted Aphrodite as his wife. Talk about aiming high. In the end, a tipsy Dionysus had to carry Hephaestus back to Olympus so he could free his trapped mother. So one of Hephaestus's dumbest but funnier moves was using his craftsmanship to imprison his mom. It was a neat trap but still a bit ungrateful. After all, Hera had raised him until he got tossed out, and it caused a serious ruckus on Mount Olympus for a while. Poor Hera only wanted to relax, and instead she needed a locksmith, or in this case, a drunk god, to unstick her seat. Not the ideal way to make amends, even if he was annoyed about being thrown out earlier. Hera, the queen of the gods, had a reputation for jealousy and petty punishments, especially against her husband's lovers. One famous incident involves Zeus's affair with a mortal priestess named Io. To hide Io from Hera, some stories say Zeus turned Io into a heifer, a cow. Regardless of who did it, Hera ended up with a cow on her hands that was actually a human. Hera wasn't fooled for long. She asked for the heifer as a gift and then had a 100-eyed giant, Argus, guard Io around the clock. Eventually, Zeus sent Hermes to lull Argus to sleep and kill him, freeing Io. That alone was pretty wild. But Hera didn't stop there. Even after Io was out from Argus's watch, Hera kept messing with her. She sent a gadfly to chase Io endlessly. This meant poor Io, still a heifer, had to wander the world mooing for days on end, as the gadfly continually stung her. In fact, Io's wanderings gave names to places. Bosporus means cow crossing. Eventually, Io was restored to human form, but only after suffering Hera's cruelties for years. So yes, turning Io into a cow and tormenting her was one of Hera's dumbest moves. It didn't get Zeus back, he just kept having affairs. And all it did was torture an innocent woman for no good reason. Hera was so consumed by jealousy that she invented epic cow and fly-related punishments. And as a side note, Argus's 100 eyes ended up decorating Hera's favorite bird, the peacock. Talk about recycling that plan. Dionysus, the fun-loving god of wine and revelry, had one of the goofiest forms of divine justice. The story goes that a band of Tyrrhenian pirates once kidnapped Dionysus, thinking he was just a wealthy boy. As soon as they had him on deck, Dionysus decided to teach them a lesson. He caused wine to flood all over the ship and let ivy vines entwine the mast. Terrified of their drunken cargo and failing to restrain him, the sailors went absolutely mad. Then Dionysus transformed himself into a terrifying lion and a bear on the ship. Faced with the wild beasts, the pirates jumped overboard, only to find they instantly became dolphins. The only one spared was the truthful helmsman, who had tried to warn his crew to let Dionysus go. In short, Dionysus literally turned kidnappers into dolphins. It's both hilarious and dark. The next time you see dolphins dancing in the sea, remember, it might just be former pirates enjoying eternity for messing with the wine god. This was Dionysus's signature move, a mix of drink-induced madness and animal transformations. Freaky? Yes. Dumb? Well, the pirates definitely underestimated giving the god of wine a free ride. But it's an unforgettable bit of mythology that's as crazy as it is comical. Finally, let's tip our hats to a more metaphysical silliness. The ancient Greeks even had a concept for pure foolishness embodied as a spirit. Koalamos, the personified spirit of stupidity and folly. Aristophanes, the ancient comic playwright, mentioned offering a sacrifice to Koalamos in one of his plays. Koalamos wasn't an Olympian god, but it's amusing and somewhat ironic that the Greeks acknowledged stupidity as a force of its own. It tells you something about the stories we've been discussing. These dumb acts by the gods were so recognized as ridiculous that they had a deity for sheer silliness. So, in a sense, we can even say that Koalamos won the day. The god's ridiculous behavior practically earned him a place in the pantheon of ideas. Between Zeus's soap opera antics, Artemis's overreactions, Dionysus's dolphin trick, and the rest, Mount Olympus was a pretty comedic place when it came to common sense. Alright, let's shift our sleepy gaze to Hermes, the messenger god, patron of thieves, travel, and just generally causing problems. Hermes was clever, sure, but sometimes he was a little too clever for his own good. You ever hear the story of how he stole Apollo's cows when he was literally a baby? Like, straight out of the womb, still smelling like Olympus brand baby powder. Hermes was born in the morning, and by the afternoon, he had already stolen 50 of Apollo's sacred cattle. To avoid being caught, Hermes made the cows walk backwards so their tracks would look like they were going the other way. Genius? Yeah. But also, come on, man. That's your brother's cattle. Give it like a week before you start pulling heists. When Apollo found out, he was ready to incinerate the kid. But Hermes, being Hermes, played it off by inventing the lyre, yep, that instrument made from a tortoise shell, and offering it as a peace gift. And it worked. Apollo gave him the cattle and was like, "All right, you got spunk. Kid, So yeah, Hermes stole livestock as a baby, lied about it, and then invented music as a cover story. That's some next-level toddler nonsense. Oh, and let's not forget Hermes' role in basically every chaotic myth. He helped Odysseus escape from Circe. He escorted souls to the underworld. He delivered messages from gods to mortals and often added his own twist to them. Think of him like that one friend who relays messages but always adds like a little sass or sarcasm just for fun. And then there's that time he helped Perseus behead Medusa. Hermes gave him a sick curved sword, some winged sandals, and told him, yo, don't look her in the eyes unless you want to become a garden statue. Useful advice, but also, like, who's handing out winged footwear and invisibility helmets to random dudes with no combat experience? Hermes, that's who. Okay, now let's drift down into the underworld, where Hades rules. But it's his wife Persephone that gives us one of the strangest and dumbest contract mistakes in myth. So Hades kidnaps Persephone, not cool by the way, and brings her to the underworld. Her mom, Demeter, is the goddess of agriculture, and she is furious. Like, turn off all the crops level mad. Winter begins. The earth starts dying. Mortals are starving. Zeus has to step in like a panicked teacher during recess. Eventually, they strike a deal. Persephone can return to her mom, as long as she hasn't eaten anything in the underworld. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. Persephone had eaten 6 pomegranate seeds. That's it. Just 6 little seeds. And because of that, she was bound to return to the underworld for 6 months of every year. That's literally how the ancient Greeks explained the seasons. She's above ground for spring and summer, and when she returns to Hades, we get fall and winter. So yeah, the seasons exist because Persephone had a pomegranate snack during a kidnapping. Which means one of the most basic natural cycles of the earth was caused by someone getting peckish in the worst possible place. Okay, this one's just tragic. Prometheus was a titan who actually liked humans. He felt bad for us. We were cold. We were weak. So what does he do? He steals fire from the gods and gives it to humanity. Pretty nice, right? Well, Zeus was not having it. Prometheus was like, yo, people need fire for warmth and food, and Zeus basically went, yeah? Well, you need eternal punishment. So Prometheus gets chained to a rock. And every day, a giant eagle flies down and eats his liver. Every single day. And because he's immortal, it just grows back overnight. Rinse and repeat. Eternal digestive torment. Prometheus is basically the mythological version of someone who got infinite timeouts for sharing. Eventually Heracles saves him, but man, that's one of the dumbest overreactions in mythology. You gave them fire? How dare you? Here, enjoy liver sushi forever. Let's talk about Medusa, but specifically how she became the Gorgon with the snake hair. So originally, she was a normal woman, a beautiful one even. She was a priestess of Athena, and she took her job seriously. But then Poseidon comes along, sees her in Athena's temple, and does what Greek gods tend to do when they have zero impulse control. Instead of punishing Poseidon, Athena punishes Medusa. Yeah. She turns Medusa into a monster with hair made of snakes and a gaze that turns people to stone. Why? Because she dared to get assaulted in Athena's own temple. Of course, Medusa eventually gets beheaded by Perseus, but she actually ends up kind of iconic in pop culture. Still, it's hard not to look at her story and go, that was a series of really dumb decisions by the gods. Theseus gets remembered as the guy who slayed the Minotaur, but honestly, he might also win the award for most unnecessarily messy breakup in Greek mythology. So here's the setup. King Minos of Crete was demanding tribute from Athens, 7 boys and 7 girls, to be fed to the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull creature that lived in a labyrinth. Because, normal diplomacy wasn't an option. Theseus, Prince of Athens, volunteers as tribute like he's in some ancient Hunger Games reboot. Once he gets to Crete, he meets Princess Ariadne, daughter of King Minos. Ariadne instantly falls for him and gives him a ball of thread so he can navigate the labyrinth and escape after defeating the Minotaur. Theseus is like, wow, thanks. Slays the monster, escapes the maze, grabs Ariadne, and sets sail for Athens. Cool, right? Except Halfway home, he ditches her. Just leaves her sleeping on an island. Naxos, like, thanks for the thread. Good luck out there. Why? No one really knows. Some versions say Athena told him to. Others say Dionysus wanted Ariadne for himself. But honestly, it just feels like a huge jerk move. Oh, and it gets dumber. Theseus had promised his father, King Aegeus, that if he survived the mission, he'd change the color of his ship's sails from black to white. So Dad wouldn't worry. But guess what? Theseus forgot to change the sails. So when King Aegeus sees black sails on the horizon, he assumes his son is dead and throws himself off a cliff. That's right. In one trip, Theseus dumped his girlfriend and indirectly caused his dad's death because of laundry. Legend says that's how the Aegean Sea got its name. Tragic, and just a little bit stupid. Narcissus was so attractive that everyone fell in love with him. Nymphs, mortals, probably goats. But here's the catch, he was totally full of himself. Like peak self-obsession. He rejected everyone. Didn't matter who they were or how much they adored him. One of his victims, a nymph named Echo, was cursed to only repeat what others said. So when she tried to confess her love to him, she could only echo his words. And he just walked away. The gods weren't pleased with his too-hot-to-care attitude. So as punishment, they made him fall in love with his own reflection. He saw his face in a still pool of water, thought it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, and just stared at it. Couldn't leave. He literally wasted away looking at himself. Some versions say he fell in and drowned. Others say he turned into a flower. Either way, it's poetic and absolutely unhinged. Imagine getting cursed into a mirror selfie so hard you die. Also, this is where the word narcissist comes from. So next time someone posts 30 gym selfies in a row, thank Greek mythology. Eros, or Cupid, if you prefer the Roman version, is the god of desire, and he falls in love with Psyche, a mortal woman so beautiful that people stop worshipping Aphrodite because Psyche exists. Aphrodite is furious and sends Eros to mess with her, but he ends up falling for her instead. But here's where things get wild. Eros takes Psyche to a magical palace, marries her, but tells her she can never see his face. Like, ever. She can live in luxury, get pampered 24/7, but she has to trust that he's hot and not like a cursed beast or something. Eventually, her jealous sisters convince her that her husband might actually be a monster. So one night, Psyche lights a lamp while he's sleeping and sees Eros is, in fact, a literal hot god. But a drop of oil from the lamp wakes him up, and Eros is like, "How could you not trust me?" and just leaves. Cue Psyche's dramatic quest to win him back. Aphrodite puts her through the ringer, like making her sort a pile of seeds by hand and fetch water from the underworld. It's like a mythological version of The Bachelor meets Fear Factor. Eventually, Psyche proves herself, and the gods make her immortal so she and Eros can live happily ever after. Still, let's be honest, the whole marry a woman and never let her see your face thing is a terrible plan. That's not romance. That's a red flag with wings. Bellerophon was a pretty standard hero. Handsome, brave, mildly arrogant, you know the type. He tamed Pegasus, the winged horse, with help from Athena and went on to defeat the Chimera, a fire-breathing lion-goat-snake creature. Pretty impressive. And you'd think that after saving kingdoms and slaying beasts, he'd be satisfied. But nope. Bellerophon decides, hey, you know what would be cool? Flying to Mount Olympus and hanging out with the gods. Which is basically the ancient Greek equivalent of sneaking into the VIP lounge at the God Club in sweatpants. So he hops on Pegasus and starts ascending toward Olympus like he's got a golden ticket. And the gods, they are not amused. Zeus sees this and is like, bro. No. He sends a gadfly, yes, a little bug, to sting Pegasus mid-flight. The horse bucks, Bellerophon falls all the way down to earth, and depending on the version you read, he either dies horribly or lives the rest of his life crippled and wandering aimlessly in disgrace. Lesson learned. Just because you can ride a flying horse doesn't mean you should go crashing heaven's gates. Orpheus was the greatest musician in the world. His music could charm animals, trees, even the rocks. When his wife Eurydice died, He was so grief-stricken that he did what no one dared to do. He went into the underworld to get her back. And miraculously, it worked. His music softened the heart of Hades himself. He and Persephone agreed. Eurydice could leave with him, as long as Orpheus walked ahead and didn't look back until they were out. Seems simple, right? One rule. Just one. So they start walking. Orpheus hears her footsteps behind him. They're almost out. Almost. But then Orpheus, being the anxious king he is, turns around just before they reach the exit. Boom. Eurydice is gone. For good. It's one of the most frustrating fails in mythology. You made it through the realm of the dead, sang your way past Cerberus and ghosts, and then you screw it up at the finish line? Honestly, it's like unlocking the final boss door and tripping on a rock. So Heracles, Hercules, was the most famous demigod. Strong, heroic, beloved. But even he wasn't immune to ridiculous death by wardrobe. This story starts with Nessus, a centaur. He tries to kidnap Heracles' wife, Deianira. Heracles shoots him with a poisoned arrow. As Nessus is dying, he tells Deianira, "Hey, if Heracles ever loves someone else, take some of my blood and rub it on his clothes. It'll make sure he stays loyal." You see where this is going. Years later, Deianira gets jealous and remembers this love potion. She soaks one of Heracles' shirts in Nessus's blood, not knowing it's full of hydra venom from the arrow. Heracles puts it on and is immediately in agony. The venom melts into his skin. No way to take it off. He ends up building his own funeral pyre and burns himself to escape the pain. So yeah, Hercules, the slayer of monsters, dies because of a cursed shirt. Not a battle, not a god, just a really, really bad laundry day. Let's revisit Pandora real quick. Remember how Zeus gave her that mysterious jar, not a box. The box thing was a translation goof, and she opened it? Yeah. That's when disease, sorrow, war, and general human suffering burst out into the world. But let's go deeper. Why did Pandora open the jar? Because she was curious. Zeus literally designed her with curiosity as her main personality trait. It was like gifting someone a shiny red button and saying, "Under no circumstances should you press this." She pressed it. Of course she did. But here's the twist. The jar didn't empty completely. One thing stayed inside. Hope. It's poetic, sure, but also wildly confusing. Did hope get trapped inside, leaving humans hopeless? Or was hope preserved as our last comfort? Who knows? All we know is the whole myth boils down to, let's see what happens if we give humans pain. But make it symbolic. So thanks, Pandora. Now we cry, sneeze, fight wars, and write moody poetry. Bellerophon tamed Pegasus with help from Athena. He used the winged horse to defeat the Chimera and earned massive respect. But it wasn't enough. He decided to fly Pegasus straight up to Mount Olympus to join the gods. Zeus, unimpressed by this mortal's ego, sent a gadfly to sting Pegasus mid-flight. Pegasus bucked, Bellerophon fell back to Earth, and depending on the version, he either died on impact or lived the rest of his life broken and wandering, blind and crippled, completely forgotten. All because he wanted to be a sky-hopping god groupie. Orpheus loved Eurydice. She died from a snake bite. Grieving, he traveled to the underworld and begged Hades and Persephone to return her. He played his lyre, and the gods, moved by the music, agreed on one condition. He had to walk out of the underworld with her following behind him, but he couldn't look back until they were both in the world of the living. At the very last step, just before the threshold, he turned around. She vanished instantly, gone forever. He lost her twice, once to death and once to doubt. Heracles killed Nessus, a centaur who tried to abduct his wife, Deianira. As Nessus lay dying, he told Deianira that his blood could be used as a love charm to keep Heracles faithful. Later, when Deianira suspected Heracles of cheating, she smeared Nessus's blood on a tunic and gave it to him. The blood, poisoned by Heracles' own hydra-tipped arrows, seared into his skin. He tore at his flesh but couldn't remove the tunic. In unbearable agony, he built a funeral pyre and climbed on it, asking someone to light it. He burned alive, betrayed by a blood-soaked shirt and a lie. Pandora was created by the gods and given to mankind as a gift and a trap. She was given a sealed jar and told never to open it. But she was made curious. It wasn't an accident. Curiosity was wired into her. One day she lifted the lid. Out flew every misery. Disease, death, famine, war, jealousy, despair. All of it flooded into the world in seconds. She slammed the lid shut too late. Only one thing remained inside: hope. The world became crueler, but that one flicker stayed at the bottom, waiting. Because even in a universe cursed by the gods, they left just enough to keep people going. Icarus and his father Daedalus were imprisoned on the island of Crete. Daedalus, a master craftsman, built wings from feathers and wax so they could fly to freedom. Before takeoff, he warned Icarus not to fly too high. The sun would melt the wax, or too low, where the sea's dampness would ruin the feathers. But once in the air, Icarus felt the thrill of flight and soared upward, higher and higher. The sun melted the wax. The wings unraveled. Icarus plunged into the sea and drowned. His body washed ashore, and the place was named the Icarian Sea. He died because he didn't listen, because flying felt too good to stop. Atalanta was the fastest runner alive and refused to marry anyone who couldn't beat her in a race. If they lost, they died. Man after man tried and failed. Then came Hippomenes, who knew he couldn't win by speed alone. He prayed to Aphrodite, who gave him 3 golden apples. During the race, every time Atalanta pulled ahead, he threw one to distract her. Each time she stopped to pick it up. He won the race. She married him, but they forgot to thank Aphrodite. Offended, the goddess cursed them with uncontrollable desire. They ended up having sex in a sacred temple. The gods turned them into lions. No one raced again. Achilles was invincible, almost. His mother Thetis dipped him in the river Styx as a baby, holding him by the heel. That spot, untouched by the water, stayed mortal. In the Trojan War, he was unstoppable, slaying Hector and countless others. But in the final days of the war, Paris shot an arrow, guided by Apollo, that struck Achilles in the heel. He died from the wound. The most powerful warrior fell because of 1 inch of vulnerability. A single weak point ended the strongest hero Greece ever knew. Sisyphus was a clever king who cheated death twice. First, he chained up Thanatos, the god of death, so no one could die. Then, when he did die, he tricked Persephone into letting him return to the living by claiming his wife hadn't given him a proper funeral. He escaped the underworld again, but the gods eventually caught him. His punishment: push a giant boulder up a hill for eternity. Every time he neared the top, it rolled back down. No matter how strong or cunning, he was stuck in a loop, forever failing, forever trying, forever almost. Tantalus was a son of Zeus and a king favored by the gods, until he wasn't. Invited to dine with the Olympians, he tried to impress them with an unthinkable trick. He killed his own son, Pelops, chopped him up, cooked him, and served him as a feast to the gods. It was meant to test their omniscience. The gods saw through it immediately. They were horrified, except Demeter, who, distracted by grief over Persephone, absent-mindedly ate part of Pelops' shoulder. The gods restored Pelops to life, replacing the missing shoulder with one made of ivory. Tantalus, meanwhile, was damned. His punishment matched his crime. He was placed in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree. Every time he bent to drink, the water receded. Every time he reached for fruit, the branches lifted away. Hunger and thirst forever within reach, but never his. That's where the word tantalize comes from. Endless longing, no relief. Oedipus was fated from birth to kill his father and marry his mother. His parents, trying to avoid the prophecy, abandoned him on a mountainside. A shepherd saved him, and he was raised by another royal family, unaware of his true origin. Later, trying to escape what he thought was his fate with his adoptive parents, he fled, only to unknowingly fulfill the prophecy. He met his real father at a crossroads and killed him in a dispute. He arrived in Thebes, solved the riddle of the Sphinx, and was rewarded with kingship and the hand of the widowed queen, his mother Jocasta. Years later, after a plague and a string of disasters, the truth came out. Jocasta hanged herself. Oedipus gouged out his eyes and wandered in exile, blind and broken. Trying to avoid fate led him straight into its arms. The gods watched. They didn't stop it. They never do. Phaeton was the son of Helios, the sun god, and he wanted proof. His friends didn't believe him, so he asked Helios to grant him a wish. Helios, bound by a divine oath, agreed to anything. Phaeton asked to drive the sun chariot across the sky for a day. Helios tried to talk him out of it, begged him to choose something else, but the boy insisted. At dawn, Phaeton took the reins. The horses, sensing an unskilled driver, bolted. They veered too high, scorching the heavens, then dipped too low, setting fire to the earth. Rivers boiled, forests ignited, deserts were born. To stop the destruction, Zeus hurled a thunderbolt. Phaeton fell from the sky, burning, and crashed into the river Eridanus. His sisters became trees, mourning him forever. All of it because he needed to prove his dad was cool. Pentheus, king of Thebes, mocked Dionysus. He didn't believe Dionysus was a real god, and he forbade his citizens from worshipping him. Dionysus, amused and offended, decided to teach him a lesson. He lured Pentheus into spying on the Bakshik rites, convincing him to dress as a woman and sneak into the woods where the frenzied Maenads, female followers of Dionysus, were in the middle of their divine madness. They saw Pentheus hiding, thought he was a wild animal, and in their frenzy, tore him apart limb from limb. Leading the pack was his own mother, Agave, who only realized who he was after she was holding his severed head in her hands. She returned to Thebes, covered in her son's blood, her mind slowly clearing. Dionysus didn't just punish disbelief. He turned it into horror, madness, and tragedy. The Danaids were 50 daughters of Danaus, married off to the 50 sons of Aegyptus. On their wedding night, 49 of the sisters murdered their husbands with daggers their father had given them. Only one, Hypermnestra, spared her husband because he respected her wish to remain a virgin. The others were condemned to an eternal punishment in the underworld. Their task was to fill leaky vessels with water, jugs full of holes impossible to ever fill. An eternity of futile labor, echoing their empty marriages and the lives they ended. The image of endless effort without result shows up again and again in myth, like Sisyphus, like Tantalus, like so many who defied divine order. Niobe was the queen of Thebes and a mother of many children. Proud of her lineage and her fertility, she mocked Leto, mother of only two, Apollo and Artemis. Niobe boasted that she was the better mother and should be worshipped instead. Leto, furious, sent her children to deliver a message. Apollo killed Niobe's sons. Artemis killed her daughters. In some versions, one or two were spared. In others, all of them died. Niobe fled to Mount Sipylus, weeping endlessly. There, the gods turned her to stone. A rock shaped like a woman remains there today, and water drips from it constantly. They say it's her tears. The price of pride was petrification. Actaeon was a hunter who stumbled upon Artemis while she was bathing. The goddess of the hunt, naked in a sacred spring, was not pleased to be seen. Whether he stared too long or simply had bad luck, it didn't matter. Artemis turned him into a stag. His own hunting dogs, confused, didn't recognize him. They chased him down and tore him apart. The man who once commanded the hunt became its prey. And when the chase was over, the dogs mourned, howling over their master's body, unsure why they felt grief. Glaucus, a fisherman, once ate a magical herb and transformed into a sea god. He fell in love with a nymph named Scylla. She rejected him. Desperate, Glaucus went to Circe, a powerful sorceress, for a love potion. But Circe herself fell in love with Glaucus. When he didn't return her feelings, she poisoned the spring where Scylla bathed. The beautiful nymph transformed into a monster with 12 legs, 6 heads, and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. She hid in a sea cave, devouring sailors who passed too close. Glaucus lost her forever. Circe went back to her island. Scylla became terror itself, A triangle of unrequited love and spite turned the sea into a horror story. Pygmalion was a sculptor who hated women, believing they were all flawed. So he carved a statue of the perfect woman and fell in love with it. He kissed it, dressed it, whispered to it. Eventually, he prayed to Aphrodite to bring her to life. The goddess, amused or perhaps flattered, granted the wish. The statue became a real woman. They married and lived happily, at least in the myth. But the story lingers, the idea of loving an image, a fantasy, something made, not something real. He created a woman who couldn't contradict him, then gave her life. What she wanted was never asked. Psyche was a mortal so beautiful that men abandoned Aphrodite's temples to worship her instead. Furious, Aphrodite sent her son Eros to make Psyche fall in love with the most hideous creature alive. But Eros saw her and pierced himself with his own arrow. He fell in love. He whisked her away to a hidden palace and visited her only at night, never showing his face. He warned her not to look at him. Her jealous sisters filled her with doubt. One night, she lit a lamp and saw him sleeping, golden, divine, perfect. A drop of oil fell from the lamp onto his shoulder. He woke. Heartbroken by her betrayal, he vanished. Psyche wandered the world, undergoing impossible tasks to win him back. Eventually, the gods took pity. She became immortal, but only after trust was broken, trials suffered, and beauty put through pain. Love in the myths is always tested. Always. Narcissus was so beautiful that anyone who saw him fell in love. Men, women, nymphs, it didn't matter. But Narcissus had no interest in anyone. He rejected every admirer coldly, including Echo, the nymph cursed to only repeat what others said. When she tried to speak to him, she could only echo his words back, and he dismissed her. Heartbroken, she faded away until only her voice remained. Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, saw this cruelty and decided to punish Narcissus. She led him to a still pool of water. When he leaned over to drink, he saw his own reflection and was instantly captivated. He didn't know it was himself. He thought it was someone beautiful just out of reach. He stayed there, gazing, whispering, longing. He never left. Eventually, he withered and died beside the water. In the place where his body had been, a flower bloomed, the narcissus, beauty undone by its own reflection. The Minotaur was born from a mistake. King Minos of Crete was supposed to sacrifice a white bull to Poseidon. Instead, he kept it, thinking no one would notice. Poseidon noticed. To punish him, the god made Minos's wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with the bull. She asked Daedalus to build a wooden cow she could climb inside. What followed was the birth of the Minotaur, a monstrous creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. Minos hid it in a labyrinth beneath his palace. Every year, he demanded 7 Athenian boys and 7 girls be sent into the maze to be devoured. Theseus volunteered to stop it. With help from Minos's daughter, Ariadne, and a simple thread, he entered the labyrinth, killed the beast, and escaped. But after promising to marry Ariadne, he abandoned her on an island, asleep. He forgot to change the sails on his ship from black to white as he returned home. His father, seeing black sails and thinking his son was dead, leapt into the sea. The Minotaur died, but the web of betrayal it sprang from stretched on. Hippolytus, son of Theseus, was devoted to Artemis and chastity. He scorned Aphrodite and refused all love and passion. Aphrodite, insulted, took revenge. She made Phaedra, Hippolytus's stepmother, fall desperately in love with him. Hippolytus rejected her. Humiliated, Phaedra accused him of assault before taking her own life. Theseus believed the lie and cursed his son. Poseidon answered by sending a sea monster to frighten Hippolytus's chariot horses. They panicked. The chariot crashed. Hippolytus was dragged to his death. Only later did Theseus learn the truth. But by then, it was too late. Fidelity to one god, contempt for another, that's all it took. Arachne was a mortal woman with incredible skill in weaving. She boasted that her talent was greater than Athena's. The goddess of wisdom and crafts heard her and challenged her to a contest. Athena wove a tapestry depicting the glory of the gods. Arachne showed the gods many lies and crimes, their abuses and betrayals. Her work was flawless. Athena was enraged not by the skill but by the content. She destroyed the tapestry and cursed Arachne, turning her into a spider so she would weave forever. Her skill wasn't the problem. The truth was, Leda was a queen. Zeus saw her and desired her, so he transformed into a swan. He flew down and lay with her by force. From that union, eggs were born. From those eggs came Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, and Clytemnestra, who would one day murder her husband. Also born were Castor and Pollux, two warrior brothers, one mortal, one divine. All of it began with Zeus as a swan, not a metaphor, not symbolic, just another act of godly lust, leaving a trail of heroes, wars, betrayal, and blood. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, angered Artemis by killing one of her sacred deer. As punishment, the goddess stilled the winds, preventing the Greek fleet from sailing to Troy. The only way to appease her was to sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia. He lured her to Aulis under the pretense of marriage and killed her on the altar. The winds returned. The war began. Years later, when Agamemnon came home, his wife Clytemnestra killed him in the bath, unable to forgive the murder of their child. One death started a war. Another ended a marriage. The gods demanded blood, and the mortals spilled it. Paris of Troy was asked to judge which goddess was the fairest, Hera, Athena, or Aphrodite. Each offered him a bribe. Hera promised power. Athena promised wisdom. Aphrodite promised the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. He chose Aphrodite. That woman was Helen, already married to the king of Sparta. Paris took her anyway. The Greeks launched 1,000 ships. 10 years of war followed. Heroes died. Cities burned. All because a shepherd prince chose beauty over peace. The gods let it happen. Some even helped. And when it ended, nothing was better. Ajax the Greater was a mighty Greek warrior at Troy. After Achilles died, his armor was to be awarded to the bravest. Odysseus won it through speech, not strength. Ajax, humiliated, went mad. He slaughtered a herd of sheep, thinking they were his enemies. When he came to his senses, the shame was too great. He fell on his sword and died. No glory, no battle, just a broken man in a red haze, undone not by war, but by pride. His strength meant nothing when his mind failed him. Midas was a king who loved gold above all. Dionysus, grateful for hospitality, granted him a wish. Midas asked that everything he touched turn to gold. The wish was granted. Trees, stones, flowers, his food, his drink, even his daughter. Desperate, he begged Dionysus to undo it. The god told him to wash in the river Pactolus. He did, and the curse lifted. But the river carried the gold downstream, and Midas was left with a lesson burned into his hands. He later judged a music contest between Apollo and Pan. Choosing Pan, he was given donkey ears. Greed and poor taste, punished by transformation. Peleus and Thetis were to be married. All the gods were invited except Eris, goddess of discord. Angry, she tossed a golden apple into the banquet with the words, "To the fairest," inscribed on it. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each claimed it. They asked Zeus to decide. He refused and passed the choice to Paris. That moment set everything in motion. The judgment of Paris, the abduction of Helen, the Trojan War. One apple, one grudge, one invitation left out, and the world caught fire. Eris didn't need to fight. She just needed to whisper, and the gods did the rest. Orestes was the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. After his father was murdered by his mother and her lover, Orestes was told by the oracle at Delphi that it was his duty to avenge the death. He returned to Mycenae, killed his mother and her lover, and thought justice had been served. But the Furies, the ancient spirits of vengeance, didn't care about justification. They pursued Orestes relentlessly, driving him into madness. He wandered, tormented, until finally standing trial in Athens. The court of the Areopagus voted, and Athena cast the deciding vote to acquit him. The Furies were appeased, barely. Justice in the ancient world was never clean. It came soaked in blood and haunted by voices in the dark. Cadmus, founder of Thebes, spent years searching for his sister, Europa, who had been abducted by Zeus. The search led nowhere, and the oracle told him to stop looking and instead follow a cow until it lay down. Where it stopped, he was to build a city. He obeyed, but before he could build, he had to slay a dragon that guarded the spring. He killed it and, following divine instructions, sowed its teeth into the earth. Armed men sprang up from the soil and immediately started fighting one another. Cadmus watched as they slaughtered each other until only 5 remained. Those survivors helped him build Thebes. Later, Cadmus and his wife Harmonia were turned into serpents by the gods. He had done everything he was told and still ended up crawling. Lycaon was a king who didn't believe Zeus was really a god. To test him, Lycaon served Zeus the flesh of a human guest at a banquet. Zeus was disgusted. He destroyed Lycaon's house with a thunderbolt and turned him into a wolf. That was the origin of the word lycanthropy. Suspicion turned to savagery. Man became beast because he dared the gods to prove themselves. Endymion was a mortal so beautiful that Selene, the moon goddess, fell in love with him. She asked Zeus to grant him eternal youth and sleep so she could admire him forever. He was placed in a cave, locked in endless slumber. Selene visited him every night, caressing his face, speaking to him softly. He never woke. Some say they had children. Some say he was a doll, an object of frozen beauty. Immortality came with silence. The perfect man, untouched by time, untouched by thought. A gift that was really a prison. Typhon was a monstrous giant, born to challenge the gods. Taller than mountains, his body covered in snakes, his breath fire. He attacked Olympus, and most of the gods fled in terror, transforming into animals to hide. Only Zeus stood his ground. They battled, sky-tearing, mountains-shattering. Zeus finally struck Typhon down with 100 thunderbolts and buried him beneath Mount Etna. But for a time, the king of the gods ran in fear. Even immortals can panic. Deucalion and Pyrrha survived a great flood sent by Zeus to destroy humanity. They floated in a chest for 9 days and nights until the waters receded. Alone in a ruined world, they asked the gods how to repopulate the earth. The oracle told them to throw the bones of your mother over your shoulder. Confused, they eventually realized mother meant earth and bones meant stones. They picked up rocks and tossed them. The stones Pyrrha threw became women. The ones Deucalion threw became men. The human race was born again from stone, from metaphor, from riddles. No guidebook, just guesswork. Augeas owned stables filled with thousands of immortal cattle, and they hadn't been cleaned in years. The 5th labor of Heracles was to clean them in a single day. Everyone thought it was impossible, but Heracles rerouted 2 rivers to wash the filth away. Job done. But Augeas had promised him payment and then refused. Heracles came back later, destroyed his kingdom, and killed him. He had only asked for honesty. The punishment was a ruined city. Philoctetes was a Greek warrior on the way to Troy when he was bitten by a snake. The wound festered and began to stink so badly that the Greeks abandoned him on the island of Lemnos. For 10 years, he lived in pain and isolation, cursing those who left him. Then a prophecy revealed that Troy could not fall without the bow of Heracles, which Philoctetes had. The Greeks returned and begged him to come back. He did. He fired the arrows. He helped win the war. But he never forgot. They needed him, but only after discarding him. Loyalty came after stench. Meleager was a prince who helped kill the Caledonian boar, a beast sent by Artemis. The first wound was struck by Atalanta, a female hunter. Meleager awarded her the prize, the boar's hide. His uncles were furious a woman was being honored. Meleager killed them in defense of her. His mother, devastated by the loss of her brothers, remembered a prophecy. Her son's life would last only as long as a certain log remained unburned. She had kept it hidden for years. In grief and rage, she threw it into the fire. Meleager died instantly, a hero undone not by the boar, not by battle, but by family and firewood. Tiresias was a prophet who lived as both a man and a woman. After striking two mating snakes, he was transformed into a woman. Years later, striking again, he returned to being a man. This dual experience led Zeus and Hera to ask him who enjoyed love more, men or women. When he sided with Zeus, Hera blinded him. As compensation, Zeus gave him the gift of prophecy and an extended life. Truth was bought with vision. Sight lost, insight gained. In Greek myth, knowledge always comes at a cost.